there. You're listening to the Girl Talk podcast. My name is Carol.
I'm Kelly.
Hey, I'm Trisha.
And we want to say thank you to Compassion International for sponsoring this season of the Girl Talk podcast. Mm-hmm. Compassion is releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. They are helping communities and churches all around the world, and we believe wholeheartedly in the mission and vision of Compassion. If you'd like to find a child somewhere around the world who needs a sponsorship, you can go to thelightfm.org, and thank you, Compassion, for sponsoring this season of the Girl Talk podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about self-awareness. Self-awareness. Now, what comes to mind when I say self-awareness?
People who are not self-aware.
Yes, that is exactly what you think of. People who aren't self-aware.
Yes.
But let's kind of give it a working definition as we start to talk about it. I think it's aware of the temperature in the room.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
Aware of how you're being received.
Yes.
Yeah, that was what was coming to my mind.
What else?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's your impact on other people.
Yeah, also how you're feeling.
Yeah.
I think that's important because you can't really do anything about it until you recognize where you are currently.
Sure. But overall, you have to have a sense of what's going on around you.
Sure.
And not be all about yourself. So let's, on the opposite side of that, let's flip it over and say, what's someone who isn't self-aware? What would you say describes them?
I would say making people uncomfortable.
Okay.
I would think, and not noticing that they're making someone uncomfortable.
Okay.
And that can be because they're talking too much or too little or an attitude, but just not being aware of the impact that they're having on other people.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Talking about themselves a lot. Would you say
Yeah.
that's
Could be.
unaware of yourself in a situation? Or how you alluded to it, but the impact that you're having on the room and being able to read the room and know that, hey, I need to change course here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So from that place, let's ask the question of ourselves: are we self-aware?
I mean, it just makes me laugh to think about that, because if I say I'm self-aware, does that make me self-aware?
Yeah,
or
it makes you less self-aware,
the more I say I'm self-aware,
self-aware.
It's like
That's
humble.
right.
I am so humble.
Right.
I'm like great at being humble.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, I think in general, I think I'm probably more self-aware than not self-aware. I think I do have a tendency to think about how I'm impacting people around me, and I want to do better. I want to impact people for good. I want to lean in and be curious about other people, and I want to I want my impact on other people to be a positive one, not a negative one. And but there's a fine line, I think, between being self-aware and being self-consumed with yourself, and always thinking about yourself and your impact on other people. And so, yes. I think I'm self-aware.
I don't, until like maybe 2 years ago, ever remember this term self-aware.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it probably was, but I'd never encountered it. So it seems to me a pretty new thing that people are talking about, to be self-aware. But I think you're right. There's a very fine line in saying, yes, I'm self-aware, and being aware that you're not self-aware at that moment, so it is a fine line. Maybe that's not the question. Maybe the better question is, have you ever taken time to consider the impact that your words, actions, body language have on other people? Because I think when you kind of boil it down to those particular things that are a part of the self-awareness process, I think you get a little closer to the truth. We all have had conversations that we walked in on and everybody stops talking. And what's your automatic first thought?
Oh, you're talking about me.
They were talking about me. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know how you walk into that and everybody just kind of looks at you like deer in the headlights? And you automatically think, okay, they were talking about me. For me, I love those situations because the more awkward, the better, because I just try to make people laugh. That is my MO. That's my go-to. Any room I go into, that's the first thing. Like, if they were talking about me, I'm going to give them something to talk about. Right. I'm not going to let them waste an opportunity.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
It's going to be a bumpy ride.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But I think we've all, been in that place. So have you ever stopped to consider the way that your behaviors or actions or words affect other people in a room? And with the caveat that our words, actions, and behaviors impact different people in different ways.
Sure, right, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, this is something I've been working on a lot actually, over the past several years. Not that I'm improving greatly, but I really, like you said, I really want to improve.
Sure.
I really want to bless other people. And there was a moment that I had, I'm not going to remember exactly when it was, but let's say a year and a half ago, where I realized when I would go into a social situation, it might be like our Sunday school class, or it might be a party, or it might be a work function or something. I would walk in, and all I would be thinking about was, how am I being received? What are they thinking about me? What's happening about me? And I was very self-focused. And at some point it hit me, I don't want to be that.
Right.
And I made the conscious effort actually to be more like my mom, who I thought was so good at seeking out other people and listening to them and serving them. And so I have made a point, when I remember it, when I go into those situations, to deflect the conversation about me and really just talk to the other person. Ask them questions.
Right.
Let them lead the way.
Sure.
I'm not great at it, but I'm hopefully improving on it, because what happened was I might make a splash. I might say something funny or say something interesting, and then all the eyes were looking at me. That's not what I wanted. That wasn't good. I wanted to bless other people with attention.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah, so it's been something I've been working on, but it takes time to think about it, and it takes, again, humility.
Well, it's one of those things where we're always with ourselves, and we really are always thinking about ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we are ourselves. And so it's hard to walk into a room and not have that kind of experience where you're feeling like I need to, especially if the room's already established, I need to establish myself in this
Make
environment.
My presence known.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't everyone glad I'm here?
Right. Yes. And those people are not self-aware.
Right, yeah.
It's not self-awareness to walk into a room
Yeah.
and say, aren't you glad I'm here? But we all do have that kind of emotion when we walk into rooms.
So just as you were sharing that, something popped into my head. Do you think that's why Scripture says love your neighbor as yourself?
I do.
Yes, because we love ourselves first.
Yeah.
And we
We make
should
sure
love
that
them
we're
the way
fed every day.
we're taking
We
care
make
of
sure that we're
ourselves.
yeah. And so I just happen to think of that, like, oh, that sounds familiar. And I remembered that scripture. Maybe that's why. I don't know.
And I think too that one of the things you talked about earlier with being self-aware is, or not, the lack of self-awareness is that you talk about yourself too much.
Yes.
And I think that's a common thing, because we do all like to talk about ourselves. We want to, for the most part, we want to talk about ourselves. We want people to be interested in us and curious about us. And if we are not getting that satisfaction of people being curious about us, then we have a tendency to push harder into that and talk more about ourselves even when it's not welcome or encouraged. And I think that's one way we show our self-awareness, is by talking way too much about ourselves.
So true. I went to a party and I was exhausted because I'd had a work event earlier in the day, and I felt completely poured out. And I didn't want to go to this party, went to the party. And anytime I entered into conversation, all I did was ask the other person, what you've been up to lately? How are your kids? What are you doing with your job? Do you have something you're looking forward to? I asked question after question of them, and they were so excited to answer.
Yeah.
I didn't have to put out energy. I felt so good, rejuvenated after that party. And I didn't say, I bet you I said 10 words about myself the whole time. And it was so refreshing.
And I bet the people around you felt really refreshed and encouraged as well, because
I hope
you
so.
were curious about them.
Yeah.
So let's talk a minute about what might be a sign that you're not self-aware. So what may be some of those signs that, like, somebody's like, I don't even know, I'm not sure if I'm self-aware or not. So how would I know if I'm not being self-aware and there's something that I need to kind of deal with and wrestle with in my own heart and life? How would you know? What do you think?
Initially, I think people avoid you.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, when
That's
you
exactly what I was
mentioned
thinking.
walking up and everyone stopped talking, I wasn't thinking that they were thinking about me. I was thinking I said the wrong thing, or oh, they're like, oh no, here she comes.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if people, you can see that people are sort of changing when you come near. It might mean that you're either coming in too hot or there's some friction.
You have somebody bristles every time you walk by.
Yeah. And I also think that awareness is a part of that, because I don't think before we, started hearing this term 2 or so years ago that I'd ever even stopped to consider the impact that my words and actions and behaviors had on other people when I entered a room. Some of us are naturally more we grow up, I think from a performance standpoint, you always have this sense of reading the room and seeing, kind of where your place is and where you fit in. And I think that's partially God's gifting for us, because we just know how to go and plug into a room. But I think there's a point where that gets to be a little unstable if we're always making it about ourselves. But I think the word awareness is a lot of the battle in this, is that you stop to consider what impact you're having. That's the first place I would tell you to start. If you're just like, I'm really not sure if I'm self-aware or not, I would start with the awareness piece and say, the last time you were in a group of people, think about what happened. Think about the conversation. Think about, and I had just never, in the course of a day, had never gone like back at the end of the day and like, I'm really going to analyze this and think about. It never occurred to me.
Sure.
But I would see some of my relationships suffering, and I would wonder why. But I never took time to revisit those and understand what they mean. My friend Susie Eller said something so wonderful years ago. She said, visit the past as a scholar, not as a victim. And so I think if you look back on that last interaction that you had with whoever it is in your life, and you think about their reactions and the ways that they behaved and the things that they said, maybe you dial back into your memory and think, okay, was there something that kind of got everybody riled up? Was there something that a pattern in my life that I see forming here? Because awareness, I think, is 90% of the battle. You realize it's a problem, and then you can work on it.
Yeah. And I think we can take a lot of cues from the people around us. If you're the type of person who stands too close to people, when you're talking to them, and people,
a close talker. Remember that from Seinfeld?
Yeah. Yes. And then people start backing away every time you get close to them.
Yeah.
Or if you're somebody who talks about themselves too much and their own stories too much, and all of a sudden you see that people are kind of cutting off your conversations at the end and kind of drifting away from the conversation. You got to recognize that kind of stuff.
Why are you
pointing at Trisha? She's pointing at Trisha.
You taught me this very valuable thing in relationship and in talking with people, to turn your feet towards them.
Yeah.
And I will find that a lot of times if somebody's not self-aware, I'm turning my feet away and like trying to get away. If people run from you in the grocery store, you might be a life group leader, or you might not be self-aware. Because I have people who will run from me in the grocery store because I haven't been to life group in a couple weeks, and I'm like, I don't care if you come or not. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to know how you're doing. But if people run from you, and turn your feet towards people and be fully engaged in the conversation. Be a good communicator.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that also starts with thinking about what you're going to say and not just constantly talking. Because if you think about the impact of your words on other people, if you, for instance, love to travel internationally and you travel all the time internationally, and all of a sudden all you're talking about are your own international trips, and everybody else feels bad because they don't get to go on these international trips with you, then you're not being self-aware.
Right.
And so you need to think about your impact of your words on other people.
That is so true.
And how that's going to make them feel.
Yeah.
If you are constantly bragging about this, that, or the other, your kid's awesome. And so you're constantly bragging about how awesome your kid is. That's great. But you might be, bringing up hurt in somebody else because their kids are pretty stinky, or they
are going through a stinky phase.
They're going through a stinky phase.
Yes.
Right.
I think is what is playing into when you said the Bible verse, love your neighbor as yourself. It's not loving to brag or to not think about, like if somebody, somebody's parent just died, to tell them a cool story about your mom. Or, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's just like that just jarred me.
Yeah.
So when we're talking, to be thinking about that other person,
Yeah, right.
I think is a very loving thing to do and a very
Sure.
self-aware thing to do. I also think before you go into any sort of a situation, you got to make sure that your motive is right, and that for me, for example, if I'm needy, like if I'm feeling insecure, I'm much more at risk to not be self-aware.
Sure, right,
I'm
absolutely.
much more at
That's
risk
so
to tell
true.
you things about me, to get you, make me feel better about myself. So we got to take our own temperature, I think. I think that is part of self-awareness. Take your temperature before you go into a situation to make sure that you're not trying to get your needs met
Yeah.
by that experience.
Yeah.
I would also say something that you alluded to at the beginning of the podcast would be to get curious. Get curious about other people. Like when they tell you something, ask a question. Ask a follow-up question that shows that you've been listening to what they're saying.
And
'Cause
care.
so often in communication today, we're listening to respond, not to understand. And that's been one of my couple of years now that's been kind of coming up with me and God, and He's like, "Are you listening to understand? Or are you listening to respond?" Because a lot of times I can be, I have something I want to say, but a lot of times I just need to be engaged and fully present at the conversation in front of me, and not worry about those kind of things. But being curious about, oh, you said this, and what do you mean by that, or where was your favorite place to travel, or all of those things help you to be more self-aware, and help the other person feel important too.
Yeah.
What else?
We can change our world by being curious.
Sure.
Change our world and all of our relationships by really being curious about the people around us.
I would say this as well. If you say the wrong thing, because we all do, I know I do. Let's say you say the wrong thing, you gauge from their facial expression, ooh, that wasn't right.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
You can make that up.
Yeah.
Sometimes even I think self-awareness is acknowledging
Yes.
when maybe you stuck your foot in your mouth, because it does happen. It does happen, and we're humans. But if you're aware and you said the wrong thing, don't run away. Don't beat yourself up. Just try to acknowledge it and see if you can't rectify the situation.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, that's a big part of being self-aware is knowing that the situation needs to be rectified.
Yeah.
And then working to rectify it.
Yeah, don't just
that's
run away.
huge. Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but being aware, then correcting your mistakes, asking a trusted friend. Do you think that would be a helpful
Ooh,
thing
that's
to do?
a great idea.
Be ready. I guess.
Right.
Yes, I've never done that, but
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, we just came from a devotion about what real love is.
Yeah.
yeah.
And if real love is not telling people the truth just to avoid confrontation, you know. And I think some of the most loving things that I've ever been told have hurt at first, but there's been so much truth in it, and I wanted to isolate and run away. So when somebody says to you, if you ask a friend, do you think I'm self-aware? Is there something I'm doing? And then be open to hear that from a place of growth and love instead of condemnation. Because I think anytime somebody points something out, the automatic is to go to, oh, you're condemned. Who are you? You're condemning me. You're accusing me. But to hear that from a heart of, they want me to grow and they want me to get better and they want me to develop, and they're trying to help,
Right.
not wound.
Right. And maybe a good way to ask the question is, are there things that I do that, in what ways am I not self-aware? Because it's very easy for us to say, oh yeah, you're totally self-aware.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, you do an excellent job. And always answer questions in the affirmative. But it's like, no, let's dig in deeper. Do I talk too much about myself?
Right.
Are there times where I make you uncomfortable, or are there times where I make other people uncomfortable by my words or my actions or my, something like that, and dig in deep with people.
Well, and I go back to this, and I go back to this a lot about accountability. I'm a big believer in somebody who knows your junk, who can stand toe to toe with you and say, you know what, I'm going to hurt your feelings right now, but it's going to be because I love you. I mean, I can look back on a handful of interactions in my life, either from mentors or friends, where I've been called on something. And they have been transformational for me. Not transformational in like a fracture of relationship sort of way, but a transformation in that I realized that I was speaking from my woundedness, and that was a place that needed to be healed. And so that accountability allowed me to bring that into the light and to say, okay, here's something I need to take before the Lord and work through, whether it be in counseling or just talking with a close friend. Those have been some, I can look back on them now. At the time, they probably hurt my feelings, and I probably pouted because I'm a pouter. And, but those interactions I can point back to like being specific milestones in my journey that have helped me to grow.
Well, I love the way you started that conversation too with the saying, I realize what I'm getting ready to say is going to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry ahead of time for that this is going to hurt.
Yeah.
But I still need to tell you something.
Right.
And that's acknowledging that that's acknowledging that you're aware that
right.
of your own self-awareness too, to say,
Right.
I realize that my impact of my words are going to be hurtful.
Sure.
But I still think it's important. What a loving way to start that kind of conversation, to say, I see you and I understand you and I hurt for you, but I got to tell you something.
Yeah.
Maybe even I love you.
Yes,
Before you
yeah,
say
yeah.
And
something
I'm
like
still
that.
going to love you.
Yes, right, yeah.
I love you no matter what.
Right.
You know, those are the kind of relationships and the accountability that I'm thinking of, because those are people that are invested in your life for the long haul.
Sure.
Because there are like probably just a handful of people who know my junk start to finish and aren't afraid to have those moments with me. And I get mad and pout and run away for a while, but I eventually come back and go, oh, you know what? You're right. And this is something I either need to walk through in counseling, or I need to walk, through with a biblical mentor or a pastor of some sort. All good places for you to find help and hope in those situations. Because 9 times out of 10, what I find in my life is when I'm not self-aware, it is like so tilling up the soil of a wound in my heart and looking for somebody else to heal that wound instead of looking to the Lord to heal that wound.
Yeah.
So that's been my experience. I don't know if that's the truth for everybody, but when I've not been self-aware, man, that's the time where I go, ooh, something right here needs attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying about feeling needy.
Yeah.
And trying to get your needs met in a environment that's not going to ever satisfy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
only the Lord can.
Yeah, and we've revisited this topic several times, that you should never make big decisions. You should never go into a social situation where you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
Yeah.
All of those are just perfect breeding grounds for insecurity, and that's where the enemy strikes a lot of times to bring out our woundedness, so that we really communicate more from our pain than we do from God's presence.
And you can't really be self-aware when you're trying to get someone to fill up the hole within you.
So true.
Yeah.
And that's good. Say that again.
You can't really be self-aware when you're trying to get someone to fill up the hole within you.
Because there's only one that's qualified to do that.
Yep.
And his name is Jesus. And that's why we do the Girl Talk podcast, because we want you to know him in a personal way. And if I'm not talking about if you've been to church your whole life or how many Bible studies you've been a part of. I'm talking about a relationship with Jesus. Have you surrendered your heart to him? That is why we do this. And so if you have not, or you're not sure and have questions if you've ever done that, let me give you a number and text the word Jesus, JESUS, to 800-293-1069. What's going to happen then is we're going to send you Billy Graham's Steps to Peace with God, where he very clearly lays out how you can know for sure today if you have a relationship with Jesus. So once again, text Jesus, JESUS, to 800-293-1069. If you have questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. girltalk@thelightfm.org. And we want to say a very special thank you to Compassion International. They are releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. And we all have compassion children and can tell you story after story after story of how our lives have been impacted by children who live around the world and who are growing up in poverty, but we can do something. I don't know if you're like me, but if you've ever watched the news and thought, man, I wish there was something I could do, now there is. The organization Compassion International is working through local churches to impact families and to share the gospel with them. And if that is something that you believe in, would you go check out Compassion, their mission, their vision, even pick out a child that would be right for you at thelightfm.org. And hey, you know what? We're going to save you a seat next time we gather around these microphones for the next Girl Talk podcast.